All right. I would like to call this workshop for the West Allis Milwaukee School Board to order. Suzette, would you please call the roll?
Mhm. Yes. Mrs. Carr.
Here.
Ms. Steele.
Here.
Mrs. Kaiser.
Here.
Mr. Burns.
Present.
Mr. Becker.
Here.
Mrs. Lee.
Here.
Mr. Sikich is excused. Mr. Keller.
Here.
And President Lee.
Here. All right. We have a workshop this evening, and I know Dr. Lexman has an introduction, so I will turn it over to him.
Great, thank you. Welcome, everybody. So this is our mid-year check-in on our progress on our strategic plan, and Melissa Matarazzo is with us from Studer Education, so our coach that works with us, and so she'll do some of the intro work, and then we'll take you through each of the building blocks. So each director, leads a building block with the board committee. And so some of the conversation is, sharing the data we have, and then also just some discussion about, are there other data points, and whether that you talk about that now, or you want to take that back to committee to talk about other data points that you'd like us to start to monitor and then include in our dashboard, right? So ultimately, what we want to do is turn what we're sharing this evening into that interactive, kind of more live dashboard that we're working on with Qualtrics. But we're not quite there yet with that particular piece, but that's in the works. And Amanda will talk about some of that and share a little bit of that work in progress. I will do the building block on the that Mary Ann would normally do. So she's out with her husband's needs right now. And so I prepared and went through some of the data points, and I'll expand a little bit on that. And so with that, I'll turn it over to you, Melissa.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Lexman. And I wonder now if when you see me, your eyes don't just go strategic plan, strategic plan, which is
Yes.
okay. But I also think you're hearing about it more often than when I am here. So I think that's probably the best thing, is that this isn't an unfamiliar occasion, but we are just getting ourselves post-pandemic back into the routine of the annual view we looked at this summer, where goals were shared with you, this mid-year check-in, which will be, as the superintendent said, progress. And then we'll come back around in the summer once the data is finished for the year, and again, roll it over into next year. And I think at any of those points, as Dr. Lexman shared, there are no perfect measures in education. So it's healthy to keep the discussion going about what are we tracking and why. And certainly with the availability of what Qualtrics can do for you, you can keep your eye on more things, ideally without the manual labor that monitoring requires. So just as a reminder, we have your 2025 goals. My gosh, that's getting closer every year. Is it not? That sounded so far away when we last renewed, but here we are in 2023. And so as you'll remember, those building blocks and goals are the how for how we achieve your mission and vision. And so hopefully what you'll hear tonight is about some of the progress and some of the adjustments that we'll make at mid-year. Obviously, the equity beliefs are another core foundational underpinning, so no different than what you see regularly. But I think with this year's scorecard and the implementation of the strategic plan, I see you getting deeper and deeper into the doing of these beliefs. And I think that's great progress. So just as a reminder why we do this, and thank you for taking an extra workshop evening. I know that there is much happening in your lives and the world, but it's about keeping us in alignment. And that includes board members as well as district leaders and everyone working throughout the district, so that we aren't feeling like we're all headed in those various directions, each of us thinking ours is the best, perhaps, but rather you have a strong sense of the alignment of action happening within a complex system with a lot of different individuals involved. So in the summer, we talked about the strategic plan, which is over time yields this district scorecard, which is what we'll be looking at tonight, which is an annual look, and it has goals, measures, and strategies. So we'll go back to those. And then just as a, for you to be aware of, and each of your departments or schools is also working towards these same goals, but differentiated for them. And so that's a habit here in West Allis, West Milwaukee, which is very meaningful to gaining traction on improvement. And within the annual scorecard, we're here at the end of this three-part sort of series of activities. We're at the monitoring progress for adjustment. So rather than setting the goal and then saying at the end of the year, oh, how'd we do? Maybe we'll do different next year. We pause here. It's not to say that there aren't also micro adjustments happening all the time, which I think there are, but at least this occasion is an opportunity for you to look at the leading indicators, the things that these leaders think will predict how you're going to do at the end of the year. You've also been talking about these things in your committee meetings, so ideally there are no surprises unless perhaps there's some brand new data that you haven't seen. And then as you'll hear from these leaders, they've already been thoughtful about what will we do differently for the remainder of the year. So that's going to be a good piece of what you hear today. So with that as agenda setting, we'll take a look at success in life through college and career readiness. And the layout for the presentations are all the same. So we'll remind you of the multi-year goals, which are big, and here they are for the success in life. Then I'll ask the director to talk about the current data and pause maybe in case there are questions about the data or things you're curious about. And then their last slide will be about what's going to happen next, which I think if I were sitting in your seats as the board, when I see the data, that's going to be a natural question. So what are we doing about it? So I'll turn it over to you, teacher.
Good evening, everyone. Yep. So as you guys know what our annual goals are and the why behind why we've chosen that as our annual goal when we met with the whole committee, and especially in this area where we adjusted the goal from the first strategic plan into the second strategic plan, it really is, we know with efficacy from work that we've done in our district and from data around the nation, around districts doing equity work, that when students get the opportunity to regularly present about their work, the standards they've mastered and how they're growing as an individual, that academic achievement and social emotional learning and all the pieces that are so important to us go on the upswing, right? And we have schools that are demonstrating that here in our district, that are some of our most high achieving schools are our schools that are actively living and breathing this work all the time. And then we have other schools that for a variety of reasons are stuck a little bit. And so then we'll talk a little bit around how we're helping those schools and where we've already made some progress at increasing the number of opportunities to do those public demonstrations of learning and focusing those around the standards that students mastered. As you start in a lot of this work, you do a lot of presenting on interesting things that students have done. And as you see, even when we do school showcases, more and more, you're starting to have students start to be able to tell you the standards that they're mastering, and they're doing it in a way that's engaging and includes everybody as part of that work. So our annual markers for our area and success in life through college and career readiness was then to increase the number of schools who were doing those public demonstrations of learning at the school sites. Right. So we don't count it when they come here for their school showcase. It has to be a school-wide investment in doing those public demonstrations. And you guys are sometimes attending those. Those of you going to exhibition this week at DACI, that is DACI doing their demonstration of learning. Last year, you can see the difference when the work kind of grows into increasing academic outcomes, where anybody who went to the public demonstration of DACI last year in the fall, it was kids presenting things they were interested in and things that they did that they found to be engaging. By the spring, it was, here are the standards that I mastered, and I did it through designing clothes, or I did it through making a bee farm, or I did it through the projects that I'm doing at school. So you saw a quick evolution of that just in 1 year. You'll see if you go to exhibition this week, which I can't make, which I'm bummed about, but if you go to exhibition this week, you're going to see the next evolution of that, which are when students really can articulate not just that they mastered a standard, but where the academics come into it and the method by which they did it, and that they're working with other people and all of those kinds of things. So our goal in this area was to increase the number of schools doing that. It's green because we're on track for that. 8 out of 11 elementary schools have had what we would consider a public demonstration, which again means they're bringing the standards into it when they present on the things that they've learned and done at school. 11 out of 11 schools have had parent nights or conferences or other things, so they're also doing that work. But when it's a presentation of learning, it's that feedback from an authentic audience. So we've had 8 out of 11 schools do that. Some of them do them during the day. A few of you have swung by and seen them during the day. Some of them do that in the evening and then try to make it more accessible for families. Sometimes when we do them during the day, it allows more families to participate. Sometimes it doesn't, right? So frequently we try to do one during the day and one in the evening so that families can engage with the students as best they can. So at the intermediate level, 2 out of 3 have done school-wide things. One of them has done a school-wide thing for 1 grade level. And that was West Milwaukee did their play. I don't remember if anybody was at the 6th grade play. I don't think I saw anybody there, if I remember correctly. It was amazing. The 6th graders, the whole grade level participating together. They talked about standards they mastered by writing a play, producing a play, putting out tickets, doing all of these things. And the most beautiful part about it was when the audience then got to ask questions. The kids said things like, I was able to do this even though I was nervous because you guys were all around me. Like, that's the feeling we want 6th graders to have. That's going to make them sign up for the next one and do more. And then at the high school, 1 out of 3 high schools. So that's Statke, obviously doing that work. We have seen public demonstrations of learning, true ones, standards-based at both Hale and Central, just not school-wide yet. And so those are growth areas for us as we continue on. And then 1 out of 1 K-12 schools has done this. So that's DLBA. That's our virtual academy. So they have done one in person as well. That was a public demonstration. For Panorama, the reason that one is yellow is actually what we did in the fall when we kind of determined annual goals. I shifted a bit. So hopefully everyone's okay with that. We know we're having different issues, 6-12 with student engagement than we are in grades 3 through 5. So originally we were presenting that score as the 3rd grade through 12th grade results. And in all reality, I think we should be looking at it 3 through 5 and 6 through 12, because we are currently seeing academic outcomes in 6-12 that need to be increased. And we know a chunk of when the students are going to participate and going to engage is when they feel like they belong and they have the right supports. So I separated out those numbers. And so grades 3 through 5 were 59% favorable. And grades 6 through 12 were 46% favorable. That's an average of the things we're measuring there. So I'll continue to report from the split grade because, again, we just know we're having different challenges at elementary versus secondary in everything that we're looking at right now. So that one's yellow because we're obviously on track for elementary, but not on track for the secondary as we sit here today. So we'll keep at that one. Next one is exclusionary discipline incidents. So originally last year we had 617 students involved in exclusionary discipline. And if we are doing our restorative practices work and our foundational work right, it's not that we don't discipline students. Of course we do. We still have exclusionary discipline when it's warranted for reasons of school safety and other reasons of needing time to plan around a student to welcome them back. But we don't want that number of students doing things at school that require exclusionary discipline. That one is green because as of 12/21, we are at 167 students. So just about halfway through the year, we've cut that number by quite a bit. So that's a good thing for us. It does not mean that some of my 167 friends haven't had multiple incidents. It means that we have fewer students having the first experience of exclusionary discipline, which is what we want, because we want no student to be doing something at school that requires exclusionary discipline. But that's a very lofty goal to get to. What we want are fewer students doing things at school that create an unsafe environment. And so we are on track for that one. Next one is attendance. So again, we talked about this, 89.4 to 91 is a very small amount of growth, but this is not one that it's easy to move the needle on for this many students. But it is also green. Average attendance on 12/21, which is when we pulled this data, was 90.2% across all of our schools. Some of our schools are more in the 96% and some of our schools are more in the 86%. So I'll talk about what we're doing to work with those schools as well. When the Qualtrics dashboard goes live, you'll see the attendance data regularly getting reported, which also will help our broader community understand how significant of an issue it is at particular schools and help us all work together to get kids into school more frequently. And then the last one is about the portfolio completion is where we set the annual rate, graduation rate, I don't have like a mid-year report on. Although we've had some early graduates, we don't have annual goals on that one yet. So the other thing that we talked about was portfolio completion, because as soon as we have our students able to document and articulate the mastery of those academic standards with their reflections on it, that they carry forward from year to year, the quicker we're going to be able to close some of those academic gaps that are in there. And right now we have 12 out of 18 schools that have at least some students with entries into our portfolio, and a couple of our schools where every student in the school has made an entry into our portfolio. So that's when a student is saying, I mastered this standard, here's how I did it, and here is like my thoughts on what I'm becoming as a learner as I get older. We had a portfolio session today. So staff that were hesitant or whatnot have been in a cohort. Today was the second session in learning how to use it. What would you put in there? How do we demonstrate mastery? All of those things. And we got tons of positive feedback today. People were saying, okay, this makes a lot of sense. And it's not this enormous big thing that we're being asked to do. It's really a part of the work and capturing how students are growing. All right.
So with that, do folks have questions about, I mean, there's a lot of green here, so you might wonder why or how or that kind of thing. Go ahead.
Yeah, Kristen, go ahead.
Just looking at the exclusionary discipline, so that's a good thing, 167, it's a
Yep.
good number mid-year. Are we also kind of keeping track of like number of incidences, like as in, we have 167 unique students who have been having issues, but of those 167, are they increasing the concern? Are we having increasing concerns, and are we tracking that?
Yes. So the number of incidents at that same date was 212.
Yep.
Yep. Originally I had that in the slides,
Okay.
and then Melissa said, you reported a student at the beginning of the year. So check that one. So it was 212. So again, some of my friends are repeating some of their exclusionary discipline moments, but that's when we really do get whole teams together and make some plans of support.
Okay.
Our job, anytime somebody experiences exclusionary discipline, and typically it's because it's a safety issue, right? If you are dealing drugs at school, that's a safety issue for everyone around you. A fight, weapons, pretty major things, right? These are safety issues at school. Our job is to say, what do we need to do to plan for that student to reasonably assure the safety of that student and other people? And when we aren't sure that we can support that student at that level, that's when we consider things like a temporary placement at our tech, a temporary placement other places, additional supports, perhaps a referral for special education. Is this really a student who doesn't understand how to make good decisions? And therefore, should we be evaluating and making sure there aren't additional supports that are warranted? But that's something I work with the principals on.
Is this something that we can communicate better? Because I feel like we see a lot on social media and out there that, the behaviors are out of control. But what you're seeing here is really, it's a small cohort that's making others lose privileges because of that small cohort.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering how we could communicate that better to families and staff too, because sometimes we're in the middle of, this kid always is like this, or it's always like this in my third quarter period. It's overwhelming to try to look from the outside in as opposed to being in the thick of it.
Yep. And so one of the things thank you for asking that question, Kristen, because it's actually something I've been working with a couple of the principals on. When you have to send home 3 notices in a week that you had to go into classroom hold, your job is also then to send home 15 notices about amazing and cool things that happened, because that's a very small population of the students that you serve. Principals will do that with staff when they analyze the behavior data. They'll say, guys, when we really look at this, I realize we have 800 kids at our school or 1,000 kids at our school, but we have 15 who are, right? We have, this many that are making good choices every day and are following the support plans that we have in place for them. So they do a nice job at communicating that with staff so that staff understand, okay, the gravity of the problem, right? Although those incidents can be frightening for people, and certainly we address them as best we can and as with the highest intensity we can. The gravity of it is 96% of our kids are making good choices and doing good things. What we haven't been doing a great job at, and we actually just talked about this at leadership on Thursday, is then communicating, hey, we had 128 kids out of 200 on time for class. this hour or that hour, right? So that parents start to understand the gravity of the problem, and so that we're celebrating the number of kids. How many kids do we have that are accessing post-secondary options in high school? Like that regularly should be going home to parents. We tend to hold all of that in schools and give it in our graduation speech at the end of the year, right? When the only people there are their 12th grade parents. That's what we tend to do with that information. So that's something I'm pushing the principals on quite a bit, is to make sure you're telling the whole story, not just the need to know information from the lens of the parent all the time.
Another thing you could think about is any sort of more public, and this is very public, but communicating what we talk about tonight.
Yeah.
Because when you look at this, I mean, I think it's incredibly heartening, and it's indicative of the hard work people are doing.
Yeah.
So let's make sure,
Yeah,
get that.
people understand it.
I was just gonna throw in there, I think that this is something that we've actually talked about in our communications committee. And this might be something that we can again visit in communications about putting out something that's really goes to everybody that says, look at all this good stuff that's going on. And so it's definitely something that I think now that we hear some of this information that we can hopefully work on.
And some of it is also in how we frame it. Even when I was putting the information into this, we're identifying the kids who have experienced exclusionary discipline versus focusing on the fact that that means we have 6,900 students who have not experienced exclusionary discipline, right? So sometimes it's the lens that you put, that's the data's the data, right? But sometimes it's the lens that you put on it. And I always want to make sure we're really clear in our messaging. This does not mean that we do not take incidents of violations of our school's code of conduct very, very seriously, right? Because sometimes you'll get back, well, they just did that to the numbers because they, won't suspend kids or they won't, right? Nope. And you guys,
One suspension and one suspension significantly increases the chance for later being jailed.
yeah, for sure.
Significantly.
And
Oh,
it
yeah.
decreases your chance of being a high school graduate and right. And it increases truancy issues. And there is a ton of data. Chris and I wish I could tell you by tomorrow, I could make sure none of our kids,
Sure.
right, are ready to make inappropriate choices. And therefore we wouldn't have any of that.
Sure.
But I want to make sure people always understand it's the balance, right? It's making sure that we use that very significant amount of discipline when it's absolutely warranted with the follow-up on a very serious plan of support for that student. That's going to be a resident in our community who sometime is going to be out and about in the community. We get the opportunity to wrap our arms around that student and teach them some skills while they're still with us, right? But sometimes that's the feedback you get when you communicate those things, is that means they're not taking discipline seriously. We certainly are. We're just taking an approach to discipline that creates better long-term outcomes that serve our greater community far better.
Any other questions?
So, go back to the strategic plan and go
Yep.
back to the success measures.
Yeah.
Two things that we've been talking about since Melissa's been here. And again, we've just talked about it in committee, but I'm wondering with, possibly, senior privilege, would that be a success measure? Would that be something that we would start to include in our strategic plan? And then also, the Hanover Research.
Yep. So those are things that are likely going to end up as strategies, right? So those are intentional actions we are taking to create these outcomes, right? The Hanover Research project that we are beginning to engage with is really to look at what is being successful about some of our deeper learning work and making sure, right? It's easy to say, well, our schools with, that are doing our deeper learning work at the highest efficacy, our highest growth scores, our highest achieving schools right now, right? But especially when we look at 612, getting engaged in that work at a comprehensive high school is just far more challenging. It's bigger, there's more requirements, there's more students, there's all of those things. So some of that should result then in more public demonstrations of learning. It should result in more entries into the portfolio. The strategy behind the research, it helps us make sure that families and staff understand why that work is so important. And then the same thing with things like senior privilege option. So that's a strategy we're going to try to increase attendance. So we should start to see some of those things. It'll be really important for us, as Melissa said, 2025 is coming up pretty quickly. And so one of the tasks of the new superintendent will be to quickly start re-engaging a strategic plan committee to figure out what we need to make sure is in the next one. Right? And what of what's in this one do we want to keep because it's a success measure? Right? What things do we want to shift? Are there additional things we have done?
And that's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
I feel like those are two things that we should have.
And
don't care
those would,
wherever you
yeah,
add it.
again, it would be the strategy page. So remember, the front page are
Okay.
goals, the back page is our strategies. The strategies evolve a lot more than the front page, which are the goals. But as we've assured staff, and Marty will talk about the most recent employee engagement, I have clear direction. Oh, I'm gonna misword this one, but I have clear direction in the expectations of my job. District-wide came out higher, one of our highest, right? And that we've been intentional on opening a professional development session with our strategic plan and what we're trying to do and why. Right? And then we're seeing staff say, yes, I understand what's expected of me in my job. Like those are good, the measures.
Right.
Right? The work we're doing, and you can look at before you leave if you want to. We did the rollout with the leadership team the other day. And what I asked them to put up there was, what are the intentional strategies we have done that we think make those three things our highest scoring markers? And so that's what's on all those Post-it notes in the corner. And then those are things, Jane, that I would be using to start making strategies for the next strategic plan. Because those are the things we, with a choice and on purpose, said we were going to do, that we followed through on, that we believe is moving the needle on employees saying they believe they're more engaged in their work.
And I think the closer for that is, so when we come back at the end of the year or midsummer, whenever data is finalized, I think Jane asking, how do we think senior privilege impacted attendance is a
Right.
great question to have, right? So
Yeah.
when we try something, it's really valuable, I think, to then come back to it and say, so what difference did it make? And it might not be long enough to know if everything we try made a difference, but we should get there.
All
Other
right.
questions?
Yep.
Mr. Burns?
Is this presentation going to be available for the public beyond just this? Is it going to be out there? on the
I don't
site?
see why not.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's like anything, normally things are posted, but I don't know that lots of people go into like the agendas and board book and things like that. So putting it on the front page of our website will be helpful. Lots of this is the information that'll go in that Qualtrics external dashboard as well. So that'll help as we continue to move forward with trying to make sure that we're being transparent to the community about what we are doing.
And with that dashboard, does that, anybody in West Dallas can access that, or is that just parents?
And it'll be right on our district website. So anybody who can get to our district website will be able to see it.
So I guess, a couple of pieces with this that I'd like to ask for them, if possible. When we're communicating these things so that we do have that clarity out there, when we're putting the 8/11, if we could actually
Write it out.
clarify that, so
Yeah.
out of 11.
Yep.
And then two, as you talked about with the lenses where the exclusionary discipline, we only have 167. You know, we're looking at how many we have rather than saying it's reduced by whatever percent. And so it might be better to look at that, you know, at this point, we'd expect somewhere around 300. So we have a reduction of 45% in exclusionary
Yep.
Pieces. So we're not counting what we have, we're counting what we,
If
how
our
we've
goal was,
improved.
yes, yep, yeah. The measured improvement that we have made by percentage, yep.
Right.
Yep.
And then kind of the same thing with the like, as of 12/21, is that December of 2021 or is that December 21st?
December 21st.
Right,
yeah.
so if we could like change the month to like the
Mhm.
3
Yep.
letter and then
Yeah.
day, year kind of a thing.
Yep, some of that was a formatting thing for how it fit in the boxes.
Yeah, no.
Certainly, I got the point, and I can clean those up.
It's just so it's clear, because otherwise somebody's gonna be like, since
What
21, they're not
Since
gonna measure.
12/21,
anymore.
yep, no, I'm with you.
Okay, and then with the 4-year graduation rate increasing. Oh wait, no, that's not the one I wanted. The average attendance.
Yep.
Is this, because on our sheet it says from 93.4 to 95, but then we're looking at it from 89.4 to 91. Do we have this established as a tiered kind of component per year? So next year it'll be 92 to whatever,
Yes.
or what's?
So what happened, so this is a great question. So it's written in the strategic plan from 93.4 to 95, because when we started, we were at 93. You've since declined, as did most schools and districts through the pandemic. And so, yes, we tend to want to tier it. So if we can get to, since we declined, we said, let's try 91% this year. But yes, the intention would be in 23, 24 and 24, 25 to then make the difference between 91 and 95.
And so I guess that too would be something to communicate as saying, you know, adjusted attendance rate or something to, so that people know that this is adjusted because of the decline based on the COVID
Yeah.
years. So it's not just like 91, they're telling us it should be at 93 or 95. They suck already. So
Right.
like, yeah, just.
I would love it if I was starting with some of the baseline numbers that were in here when we made this plan in February 2020, Brendan. I would love, if that's where I was starting, but I have the opportunity to start with some new baseline data
Right.
at the start of this school year. So, but yes, I agree. That then is not clear.
Right, just so that there's some clarity for everybody that's going into it. And then I think then we can celebrate, like, look, yes, we did drop, everybody dropped. But from here to here, we can see this percent improvement, this percent, and then we can, you know, talk as it being a stair step, then we will still work to get that on track.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
I agree.
This group and this board did not shift your expectations in the strategic plan based on the pandemic. So I think it's a commendation to all of you that you didn't go back to the long-term plan and say, oh, no chance we can get there given these couple of years. You still left those as your ambitions. All right, so.
Other questions?
Thank you.
I have two.
Okay.
For the public displays of learning,
Mhm.
are we engaging the non-parent, non-staff population so that we are getting more community members to come? And I understand, even during the day, there might be community members who would be able to and want to come, probably in the neighborhood of where the school is located at, but you know, you're talking about an authentic, you know, audience, right?
Mhm.
And so parents and staff are generally going to be more supportive and more like interested in what those students are doing because they conceivably have a vested interest in the outcome, versus the average Joe Blow off the street who thinks we do nothing here. And so I think that if we can have that public engagement from general public members more and reach out to them when we're doing these sorts of things and communicate it effectively so they understand what it is and be able to get some people in there to say, oh yeah, I was there. And, you know, I was very surprised at what work was going on here, or maybe the opposite of that. I thought this was whatever. But I think at the end of the day, that is the authentic audience. I think that parents aren't going to be like, well, what the heck did you do here, son? I mean, come on, what's going on? They're going to be supportive because that's their job. But I think by having in letting the public see this is what we're trying to do, and some of the really amazing, cool things that our students are doing in these public demonstrations of learning is a good thing. So I don't know if that's door hangers. I know we have an email thing that people can opt into. I don't know if we're firing these things off those, you know, obviously putting the posts on social media, which I do see, but you know, it's a certain population of people that are going to see that, because I think that to try and be able to show to more people, you know, what is this project-based learning and how is this supposed to be good? How is this different than what New Berlin's doing or what Muskego's doing or what Wauwatosis is doing? And why do we think it's better? And so I think by having them actually be in there would be great. So and what sort of things are we doing to communicate that outside of this school sphere? And are there any other plans that we can try to put into place to expand it?
Yeah, a little bit of it depends on when you have it and how you have it structured from a school safety lens,
Mhm.
right? We don't usually just have wide open doors during the school day for a variety of reasons, right? In the last, you know, couple of years, especially, we've had some unwelcome guests. And
Mhm.
so trying to navigate how to manage that during the school day is a challenge. Certainly we've used, like you said, a bunch of the measures and the systems that we have in place, putting it out on our social media. Anybody is welcome at Ducky's exhibition night. And I think if you ever have any questions about Ducky and how it functions, that'll answer all of them for you when you go to one of those evening events or something like that. Amanda will talk a little bit more on some of the outreach that she is working to do, which then can also help with some of those things. The one area where we have increased the number of people coming to see or when we invite in outside experts. But again, they're not the people living in immediately around the house. It's where we get more national attention for this work than we do local attention.
Sure.
So today we had a panel of businesses come in. One of the professional development sessions this morning was on engaging more community partners and doing more community-based work. Another one of the sessions was around how to create families as an authentic audience and then extend the invitation to family members to bring in other people and do those sorts of things. So we're working on avenues to understand why that's so important and then strategies to do so. But Amanda will also talk about that one when she comes up, because she's been working really hard at trying to navigate how do we get at that audience?
Mhm.
You know, I would love it if more people came to these things, even when we had the community session on Longfellow. That was the feedback 2 people gave to us. How come more people aren't here? And I was like, I don't know. Go home and ask, you know, like we wish more people would be here. Go, please invite your neighbors if we have something like this again. And so I think that word of mouth sort of thing needs to kind of keep trickling out there.
And I know that we attempt to do things, but I just always see it as certain comments and things that you hear
Yeah.
certain places. Sometimes you're like, how are you so out of the know about what's going on with
Yeah.
the different aspects and things that we're doing? And so that was just something I'm thinking about, you know, how do you get the average person who doesn't have a kid in the district or a grandchild or works in the district to be able to take the time to come to something like this, to really see what's happening and what's going on in their neighborhood school, you know, that's across the street from their house. So
Yeah. And I know Joe had similar feedback when he did the school tours, is if everybody would just come and like do a school tour and learn about some of the, I don't know why you would have a question about some of the work that we are doing. And I agree, that's definitely a need for us. You know, opportunities for kids to be out and about and presenting and solving problems. That also is, we're stretching into more and more of those spaces. We've been on the news a number of more times in the last year. The stuff that ends up on the news is our project-based learning work, right? And things like that. So we're trying to do outreach to as many people as possible, so people do actually understand what's going on in their local neighborhood school. That's pretty darn amazing work, but certainly a growth area for us.
okay.
I have one neighbor who always asks about why we don't put stuff in the paper.
Which paper?
If you don't have.
Journal Sentinel or
Journal. My
That's-
neighbor- My neighbor reads the journal.
Cover our area.
First of all, it's expensive. number one.
Yeah,
And number two, yeah, it's
Well, I
a
mean,
lot
not
fewer
necessarily
people
an
read the
ad,
paper than.
right.
just
No,
just if
but-
the paper used to go.
Yeah.
If you look at the southwest section, we don't get, it's just in general, I think,
know,
yeah,
in
the
and out.
paper in and out, it's.
And you would be surprised at some of our local news media outlets, Joe. You send them all the really good things you're doing in your schools,
I
but
wouldn't
those
be
are not the
surprised.
ones they choose to report on, given the opportunity. Even occasionally when we get interviewed, you'll say 15 things about amazing and awesome things, and they'll take one clip of a part of something and kind of put that out there. So we're working on it. But yes, I agree that that's definitely hearing students talk about their work that way. That's the kind of where people are going, no questions up, you know, I don't have any other questions. And so we were making more steady traction with that. And then, you know, had a setback with the pandemic and all of those pieces. So we got to get back at some of those pieces.
Thanks.
Noah, you had another question?
Yeah, just one more.
Melissa did warn everyone that this section usually takes the
I
longest.
did. There was a suggestion that perhaps we do this section last, because often when I'm coaching, I have us end with it because it's so complex. But we let the core work start to.
So my last question's a more simple one. It's regarding the dashboard.
Yep.
So, dashboards are great, but it's really important to communicate like where the information is coming from and think about the lens that people are going to be viewing the information from. Because as someone who works in state government, we think about this quite a bit. Even simple things like displaying, you know, percentages of disease XYZ that's occurring in the state can be taken from one side to the other, depending on the lens that people are viewing it. And as such, people are super careful of what is actually put on those dashboards. So I think that we have to try to remember that for what we're putting out there. We want to be transparent, but at the same time, we don't want people to take the wrong message from what we're putting out there.
Yep.
I think color coding things is super easy for people to understand. And so if, like you've done here we have green and yellow, and we can have red and orange as well too, to show where those progresses are. So we can say, well, here's the measure, here's where we're at, and that puts us at this color. And then have a little, I don't know how exactly, if that can be done by the company or if we can request that of them, but I think that would help people who are just looking at this probably in a very nonchalant way to try to figure out, well, what are they doing here? Where are they in the strategic plan things? Well, there's lots of greens there, or there's lots of reds there. At least then they can get a good idea of what, they're meeting, they're on track, they're not on track. Well, once they aren't on track, what are those ones? They would look deeper into those. So then it might be a little bit easier for people to interpret, because these are complex things.
Mhm.
And so I think that the average person, again, is going to be like, what does this mean?
Right.
Green is good, red is
Right.
bad. That's easy for most
Yeah.
people.
And there's
Year over year.
the growth over time, definitely, like where we were, where we are, even speaking to Brendan's point, sadly, we got a new baseline and we gotta work from where we are right now. And Amanda will talk more about the dashboard. She's really owned that project, like start to finish, and done a really great job working with them. Qualtrics does this for a lot of districts, so she'll also have some samples so you guys can see what that looks like.
Okay.
But one of the conversations we did have was, what pieces of this do you communicate to the public? And it's not in an effort to not be transparent, but exclusionary discipline and some of those pieces, you have to be cautious about making sure something's not identifiable by reporting that by school. Like, well, if there's only one incident ever of exclusionary discipline, most of a whole elementary school knows the name of the student, those kinds of things. And it's a hard one for the public to just say, what does that even mean they're doing? Right? And so some things need further explanation. Attendance, it's pretty clear. This is the % of students who came to school today, right? Like that one's clearer, and then a cleaner data point to be sharing. And so we've had some of those conversations. The other thing is a dashboard will start a bit smaller and then it'll grow over time, right? Let's get people used to accessing it. Let's get people, and then Amanda, like she does now, will watch how many people clicked on it and all of those kinds of things. Let's make sure it's the data that's easy for the general public to interpret, and then let's add more things into it as we go forward.
Mhm.
Right? And are there places where you can link a video? So if somebody says, what the heck's a presentation of learning? Right? I have some really good videos of what that actually means. So if somebody was really interested, to be able to dive a little deeper. So yes, totally agree with you on that one.
Thank you.
You ready for next steps? Okay. So a big part of this is the continued support from the strategic plan partner. And so our district office team is structured quite a bit differently than most school districts. And instead of having one person who solely focuses on math or one person who solely focuses on reading, we have those people, but in addition to some of those duties, they do strategic plan partner work with schools, which means they're out and about in those schools for several hours a week, working with the administrative team, doing walks throughout the building. This year, they took on part of rapid cycle feedback. So that's part of the teacher evaluation system, to be giving teachers set their own goal, and then they report back on how they feel they are doing towards their goals. And that's how we evaluate them. And then we say, yep, I saw something really consistent to that in your classroom today. Here's a few questions I had as you're reflecting on your own practice. So strategic plan partners are doing part of that work. And so they serve a really important connection. When people say my expectations of my job are very clear, it means we're communicating well. Our strategic plan, where that falls into a school improvement plan, where that feeds into a teacher, and where their rapid cycle feedback goal contributes to what we're trying to do as an organization. So that's part of what they do. So they are going to continue that support, meeting weekly. They'll do more of those presentations of learning, wherein the students demonstrate mastery of this standards to an authentic audience, right? And increasing the variety of audience, always important. As we had the community experts in for the one session today, that helps us engage further. So we were sharing with them, why are you designing your own summer programs? Our students can do that for you, to museums and things like that. And so they were like, oh, wait, you have kids who could do that? Yes, we do. Right. And so trying to engage with that more authentic audience, and then bringing that all into the fold. If you went to the public museum and it said right there, this session was designed by students from West Allis, West Milwaukee, right? It's a different way to get out the message on the work we're doing. So they'll continue to push on the public demonstrations of learning that are standards based, right? And focused on our academic growth as well. The leadership and learning team will continue to do data reviews. I shared in a board update. That's something we added into this year as schools in the last couple of years got out of the habit of fitting what's actually are the progress monitoring we're doing through our academic data. And are we getting the right feedback that we're on the right track with some students? So we've been doing a data review, which is an optional session. I do elementaries on Tuesdays. And they come and we pull a piece of data from Scholastic. Sometimes it's some of the same data you're seeing in board reports now, and we analyze it. What does it say we're doing well? Where are the bright spots? What are the things we need to focus on in the next 30 days so that we can come back to it again? So we're going to continue doing those. We're getting a lot of good feedback from principals. Some of our principals are naturally instructional leaders, and some of our principals that, their background was in maybe they're more of a behavior specialist or more of a relational driven principal. So it's really been helping them. The feedback we're getting is I can feel more confident in my skills as the instructional leader. So we'll continue communicating with families on the importance of regular attendance at school. A couple of the individual schools have taken that on. We'll put out some district-wide communication around that with some resources for families. Couple of families we've had start to connect to school nurses and things like that. If this is becoming a problem and you need our support, let's connect you to the right resources at school. So we're continuing to work on that one. The strategic plan partners will also work specifically with the schools whose exclusionary discipline numbers are on the rise. Right. So there's a challenge then with what we're doing across the whole building if those numbers continue to increase as the school year goes on. So we have some specific protocols and things like that we're doing as we watch that data each week. And then Alex Bruzan, who some of you may know, Alex served a lot of roles for us. So he was a math teacher for us for a long time. And then he was the innovation coach at Docky. And then he was the deeper learning coach at Docky. And now he runs the We Got This Garden on 9th and Ring. You should Google it if you don't know a lot about it. It's super amazing community garden that's really changed the dynamic in that neighborhood. Alex co-runs that with somebody else and then works for us doing special projects and part-time. This year he's filling in as a couple of days a week as an AP at Hale. He does a day a week of just additional support at Hoover as we transitioned into a new principal. And then Alex takes on a variety of other projects for us. Alex helped us design the whole portfolio website. So he'll have some time in the spring to be doing a day a week where he checks in at each school and how they're doing with the portfolios, make sure that they have the right support to know how to do that, what it looks like, when to start entering things like that. We still have a lot of teachers who are doing their portfolios, but they're keeping them on their own Google site yet because they're nervous about making them public. So we're working with those teachers to see what you have is pretty amazing and beautiful. Please be willing to share that, as well as just understanding the way the dynamics work. We shared with schools that they have 2 years to really make this a regular part of their practice so that there's the entry point is there when you're ready for it. So halfway through the first year, it's good that we're calibrating on how close we're getting to that. And then Alex is going to do some additional supports in the spring to help schools really get to the next level with making sure we're really tracking our students able to master standards and articulate their process. And that's our next steps.
Questions?
I just have one quick one.
Yeah.
When you talk about working with the schools on the attendance thing, are you working like on ones that have all of the schools or just the ones that have problems? I'm just thinking because I don't think I've gotten anything like communications around attendance. So I'm just wondering if there's certain schools that we're looking at really focusing on, or should we start seeing something coming our way?
Both.
Okay.
So some of the schools we are immediately working on some of the attendance and working with our social work team in particular, because that's who, supports families through difficult attendance periods. So some of them, and I exchanged a few emails with Noah, who had a couple of attendance questions. Brendan asked me some the last time. Our attendance team is also starting to meet again tomorrow. So we used to have an attendance team that regularly met to look at statutes and the DPI guidance and our letters that go out to families and all of those things. And so they are in the process of beginning to meet again tomorrow. So twofold. So they'll work on this is what an attendance letter looks like and what it's for.
Okay.
And if
'Cause I mean,
you
I can
see
see
one
this-
of these, please know that we're trying to offer you our support.
Cause I just wonder if are we gonna have a campaign in general? It's just like,
Mhm.
hey, when you're in school, you know what I mean?
Yep.
like just a general thing to parents, like not necessarily like, just to the community at large saying, hey, this is an issue. And, if you're not here, your kid can't learn, blah, 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 blah. We're just kind of, like an overall generalized campaign, not just kind of encouraging school attendance.
Yeah, both,
Okay.
right? And we had we kind of time those so that we're not trying not to flood people all at the
Gotcha.
same
Okay.
time, right? So we had a couple that needed to go out in the last few weeks around other things. And so I have a draft of something that the attendance group will look at tomorrow. But yes, Amy, it's twofold.
Okay.
It's all of our schools could certainly benefit from a few extra percentage points of attendance, because that means our kids are in school when they're healthy enough to be there and learning. Right? So if there's a way to have your child attend school safely, please make sure that they get to school safely, and that we make sure that's a priority. But then there's also the schools where it's more chronic. Anybody in that 86, 87%, we've been doing some really intentional work with them for the last couple of weeks.
When people say we want test scores up, we need kids in the school.
It would be beneficial if the children came, because I haven't yet seen any portfolio entries of what the students are doing when they're not in school,
Yeah.
Kristen, but I have a way better capacity to understand how to
Yeah.
support them when they physically come through the doors.
No, I
That's
know.
very beneficial to us.
Thank you
All right.
so much. Oh, Brendan, did you have a
Boy,
question?
Yeah, I still have a question. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
No.
With the four-year graduation rate increase, when we have the portfolio completion, do we have anything else that we're using to measure or keep track of in order to establish that things are changing in a positive direction for the students, especially the ones that might be at risk?
Yep. So today at professional development, one of the things that staff did in the afternoon was actually review some of that data. They looked at students who are receiving Ds and Fs at the semester, right? Especially your big markers for high school graduation are ninth grade. If they've failed more than one core course, there's a very high statistical likelihood that that is a student who's going to struggle to get to graduation. So we track all of those pieces of data and that information to make sure that we can intervene a lot quicker than what we sometimes used to do, which was wait until the student was a senior and see if we could then address it then.
Sure.
So some of those markers as well, we track on a pretty regular basis.
Okay. Are we, is one of the other pieces, as I understand it, one of the big pieces that can also influence graduation is socioeconomic status.
Mhm.
And so things that would help students in those areas, well, they're not necessarily things that we can't go and be like, okay, well, you're in need, so we do but things of keeping them involved so we could track or report on increased participation in our clubs and extracurriculars, because if kids are at home on their own, a lot of times they're doing other things that aren't necessarily productive. We can look at, are there any grants that we've identified to help with mobility for students that can't necessarily get to, and any of those increases to show that we're not just looking in the classroom to help them be successful, but also, if we get them invested in clubs, if we're getting them invested in the athletics, or we're getting them transport, it makes it easy for them to take steps that'll keep them. And so it might be just kind of showing for the well-roundedness of what we're trying to do for those, because that's we can have a really big impact for those students as far as the graduation rate if we're getting them engaged.
Yep. And 100%. And so one of the things that one of the high schools and I are working on right now is when they look at that, so it's this small percentage of students that are having repeated incidents at a school. Are they in a club or an activity? Are they connected to a teacher? If we ask them in the wellness survey, do they report that they have a trusted adult at school? All of those kinds of measures that we know are going to increase the likelihood that that student is ready to graduate and move forward is helpful, and that we have the right supports wrapped around that student. How many does that student have a mentor at school? Are there other things we can do? And if they have those things, the likelihood that they're going to say, hey, the reason I haven't been at school in 2 weeks is I have this going on at home, then gives us the opportunity where we've maintained and grown our student services team every year to get the right supports available to figure out what we can do. Because there's lots of things we can do when we know that there's a student who needs us to support them.
Right, yeah, no, and I understand the student individual interactions and things. I'm just, I guess I'm talking as more of another piece to help shout out what we're doing to support everybody, and we can talk about, rates of extracurricular things have increased by 4%, which is, and
Don't forget, we added the bus.
right, well, and funny, because I emailed earlier today about that bus to see what's going on. But,
What's the, yeah,
so there's, we can see what these are, and we can say, we've added this bus, which has helped add this, which, the
Mhm.
more students are engaged, the higher probability they're going to be successful. And so I think that just adding those pieces as the global
sure.
track, because a lot of people, even with the portfolios, if they're not in the schools and don't have the kids, the portfolios are gonna be like, what's that?
Right.
Who
Yeah.
cares?
So we
But
would
they'll,
think-
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, we could think as we continue with the scorecard into next year, that maybe a couple of those predictors that you just mentioned could go onto this mid-year report. So what is our passing attainment at mid-year, which we might be a little early for today, but,
We have
and-
finals exams this week,
Yeah,
so we
so
have a
you- be a
decent
little later,
predictor of
But then
a
you
few.
get
Yeah.
a good predictor of who's attaining credit right now or likely to attain credit. And then the after-school activities is always a bear for tracking. So that one might take a little longer, but if you can figure it out, it is a nice, the indication is 2 or more activities is gonna make you likely to be successful beyond high school. So I think that would be one
Yeah.
maybe we work into next year.
And we have talked about historically in the past too, not just tracking and reporting that. So we ask at the beginning of the year, a survey on clubs and activities you might be interested in that we've worked on. Like, how do you measure to make sure we have more and more students participating in some of these things? It's a challenge. We've tripled the number of clubs we offer at the secondary schools because we think if at least 2 kids sign up for it, it's worth running because somebody's coming to something, right? And a few of them, I'm like, what would we even do in there that I don't even know what they are? But that's been the intention, is to make sure we're offering a wide variety of things by asking kids. Students can start clubs and, we have processes for all of those things, but I agree with you. Being able to say these are additional things we are doing on top of that. We aren't great at selling sometimes some of the great things that we are doing that help with some of those things. At one point, as a committee 4 or 5 years ago, we batted around the idea of making participation in a club, an activity, or a sport or music or whatever your choice is, a graduation requirement, at least participating once. But the gravity of that and how to make sure everybody had access kind of is where we sat on that one as well. Because it is really important for students to have multiple avenues to be connected to school.
Yeah, and I think even if it's just also reporting on the number of clubs that we've expanded to.
Sure.
In order to open up pathways, but this could also not just be clubs, it could be the tech school, co-ops, it could be any of those extra pieces that we're expanding to allow for the better accommodation, because the more diverse our offerings are, the more likely students will engage with things that they enjoy, which then is going to keep, all of these pieces. And so I think that graduation one, if we just report on the portfolio, I think that does us a disservice.
Yeah,
for-
I apologize. Those aren't intended to be an
No,
equal
no.
measure, right? But yes.
But that's what somebody looking out here, especially
gonna
if we put
assume.
that, they're like.
Yeah.
That's
What's
not
it?
gonna,
Yes.
so I think that this is one, if this is truly like our report of where we are mid-year, we can do some shout outs on some other pieces that are like. demonstrating
Celebrations, yeah.
change.
And the things that we are doing to counteract what becomes sometimes the effects of socioeconomics on outcomes at school, right? Like that's a well-researched and known predictor in the world. And so our schools frequently are giving kids the opportunity to figure out pathways for themselves that they wouldn't otherwise have.
Right.
Yeah. One of the things that will go on the dashboard are the number of students that are participating in early college now, which is when students take a course at the technical colleges when they're in high school, and the post-secondary advancements. So like a student who have a wonderful challenge to solve is that I have a 5th grader currently taking geometry, who is going to run out of math classes pretty soon here. So that student would get the opportunity to pursue then some college level math and things like that when they're in high school. We aren't great at reporting the number of those and the increase and the number of kids in youth apprenticeship. So part of that is also what got tracked on the dashboard too.
Right.
But number of clubs we're currently offering, that could get tracked because sometimes that might be a parent saying, wait a minute, do they have clubs at my kid's school? I didn't even know they had clubs.
Mhm. Yeah, so just
Yeah.
pieces.
Those are good.
Okay,
Now I'm gonna go.
now. probably it's time
Now that she's exhausted. Amanda.
To our people and just starting with the long-term or the 2025 goals, you can see the focus here in the first slide, and then I will let you, Dr. Lexman, speak to
Okay.
where we're at.
Yeah, so we'll go back for that
Yep.
first slide. The last bullet there, increase diversity of workforce through targeted recruiting and retention by 10%, which would be a 0.38 improvement. It should say to 10%.
Oh, gotcha.
Uh,
That's kind of
right.
important. That's two very
because
different
we're
things.
well ahead of that actually at this point.
Okay.
And so that's good news for us. And then before I jump into this with that slide, I've been adding into our director's agenda from the previous conversation. So there's some takeaways here. So we're going to explore just what would be the cost and the impact of a general advertising campaign about our work. Lots of independent charter schools, I hear them on NPR all the time, right? And maybe it's worth that we start telling the story and spend a little bit of money on it. Attendance Works is also an organization that has developed really targeted messaging and they have data that proves it works. So targeted messages for different kinds of kids and families and circumstances. So I think exploring that. And then the ninth grade indicator that Deidre mentioned, we've talked about it over time. It's research that comes out of the University of Chicago that it goes back into the 90s with Chicago Public Schools. And it's pretty clear that a ninth grader that finishes ninth grade with 5 full year credits and no more than 1 semester F graduates, right? And so I think it'd be interesting data for us to start to layer into this and even into the dashboard. So that conversation gave us some work to do, but I think it's the right work. So thanks for that. So let's go on to the employee engagement and culture. Jump over it so I can see it. So this was for this year, right? Increasing the number of district employees participating in the survey from 603 to 703. And so that actually went down a little bit, right? So we went from 603 to 597. We're still within the same range, but we're gonna have to start to talk about it. Is it time to, do incentives? Is it time to start to set aside time specifically that we instruct, like now you take the employee engagement survey. What we haven't done is track by email because we wanted this always to be anonymous, right? So that's the hard part of trying to increase participation rates is we don't know who has and has not participated to do more targeted engagement with them. Yeah.
Question. I think this has been brought up with other things, but should we be looking at this by a percentage increase only because we say 597 participants is what we had this year, and that's a decrease, but how many employees did we decrease since last year as well? So I think that there's some information there as well, because I think percentage wise, we might have actually increased. But that number tells a different story.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's yeah, so then.
I know.
So I would just say the reason I think in some of these, we went with straight numbers in the past, and we can certainly shift again, is there clarity to the the folks who aren't on the inside of this. So 10%, what does that mean? 5 people, 100 people? This is a little clearer, but I still think you're right that with variation, when the denominator varies over time, then it's not actually necessarily.
Either that or you have to give a lot more data, like, okay, the number is this was our goal, but also this.
Exactly.
So
You can just put an N.
yeah, right.
Usually how you just display, you have the percent and then you have N equals, and then
Yeah.
they can say what the
That can
number
help.
is, but the percent really at the end of the day is what you're trying to get.
Okay. That's good. The next one was for this year, increasing employee engagement from 3.62 to 3.77, and that's green because in the fall administration, we hit 3.77 exactly, which is kind of odd, but okay. But there's, I think other interesting news inside of the results of this one. And even though we're not where we'd like to be, right, there's also always lots of room for improvement, and we'd love to see every single question at a 4 or higher. But I want to highlight a couple things. First of all of the items on the survey, 2 went down and everything else went up. I don't know that that's happened for us before. So I think that's a really good indicator. The ones that went down, my principal supervisor recognizes good performance. That's not a hard one to get to move, but it's just some intentional practice on parts of leaders. And then my principal supervisor makes best use of available funds, are the 2 that went down. The ones that I think are really important, one that we're always proud of, that has always been 4 or higher, is my principal supervisor demonstrates a genuine concern for my welfare. And that one went up again. And so that one stays high for us. The one that Deidre cited, which is a pretty big increase on this scale, my principal supervisor sets clear expectations for judging performance. It went from 3.7 to 4.15. And so that is, I think, an indicator that we're getting clear about expectations and people know what they're aiming at. A couple other that went up, that this one has always been one we've watched and been concerned about it. If given a choice, I would recommend that a parent select this district for his or her child. It was at 3.03, it went up to 3.36. And that one has gone up since last fall, where it was the lowest it was had ever been at 2.99. And so in a year, went from 2.99 to 3.36. So
That's pretty amazing.
that is so that's, and that perception piece about that we're getting better for my kid is I think an important indicator. And then another one that took a big leap is open and honest communication is an important part of the culture in my school district. It went from 3.11 to 4.03. So getting close to a full point increase is another really positive indicator that among employees, there's a sense that we're moving in the right direction, I think, overall. And so, there's the spring administration, that one comes with comments. The fall, we don't collect comments. And so there's always more to glean in the spring with the comments. But overall, that is green and good news. Decreasing voluntary staff turnover from 20.51. Again, this was kind of a reset given post-COVID, where there was just a lot of turnover. So we took quite a swing from where we were. Getting it to 16.5. It's yellow because this is really an end of year indicator. But right now, you're right. So at the end of last year, it was 18.2%. So we're moving in the right direction. And through the end of December, it's 6.9. But 6.9, for the first 6 months, it doesn't really tell you a lot because the turnover really comes at the end of the school year. And voluntary means that does not include retirements, that we exclude people that, my spouse got a new job in California, we have to leave. So we exclude those. This is really people that, like, I'm going to go get a job, in Brookfield. That's what we're really tracking in terms of voluntary turnover. The next big area was implementing a compensation system, both salary and benefits, that ensures a district is comparable with area districts. So the board's well aware of where we are in the benefit side, right? So changing retiree healthcare to an HRA potentially. Aaron's been doing a lot of work even today on the communication rollout related to that. But again, it's yellow because there's a lot of pieces in the works during this year. But we were able to offer the full CPI increase this year of 4.7%. And we added the $1,000 stay bonus for teachers in good standing. So the first $500 was paid, the second $500 gets paid in March. And then for our special education teachers, our educational assistants and youth advisors, we reviewed the salary structure and made some revisions there. So 30 individuals out of those groups received a wage increase. So adjustment, but it's always an increase. And then the last bullet, increasing the diversity of our workforce through targeted recruiting and retention, going from 7.1 to 10.1%. And we're on track here. And this is interesting because if you look back at the baseline in the strategic plan was 3.8%, right? So in 2020, that's where we were in terms of the number of people of color within our workforce. And I appreciate what Marianne has done here. And Marianne loves the data side of the work that she does. So she's broken it out in ways that we didn't even think of. So we're at 9.7% overall, which is really quite an improvement and getting close to the goal. For this year, the 6.9% of the teaching staff, and that's the one we'd like to see improve and improve and improve, because we think it's important for the diversity of the students we serve, for kids to see people that look like them, that have experiences like them, that they can connect with. But inside of that, 14.6% of our new employees, right? So that is a trend that then is starting to move in the right direction. And 12.3% of our new teaching staff, people of color. So those are all really encouraging trends for us. Some of that is we've been really intentional. Every job posting leads with a statement around welcoming candidates from diverse backgrounds because of our commitment to diversity, and it makes us all stronger. So that's an important part of it. And another strategy that we try, although we need more people of color to really implement this strategy, and it's a little bit of a lesson learned from the Closing Achievement Gap Consortium. And one of the professors from Concordia, where the whole consortium is hosted, and he was an administrator in MPS, African-American man, and I've known Eugene Pitchford for a long time, and he was doing a presentation, and he talked about early in his career, it meant a great deal to him if he walked into a room for an interview and there was someone that looked like him. He said, okay, I know this place is going to be okay for me. So we try where we can to make sure we have a person of color on an interview panel, because we don't know who's showing up, but we want to make sure that whoever it is, they see someone that they go like, okay, this probably can be a welcoming place for me. So I'm hoping those are part of what's contributing to it, but we want to keep moving that forward, those indicators, just because the diversity of our students will continue to increase, right? So we're more kids of color than white kids, and that's not going to go the other way at any time in the future. So that's where we are. So questions there?
Right.
Going back to the voluntary turnover piece, do we have any new data on exit interviews and how successful those have been recently? I know we've talked about different strategies to potentially get more people to actually participate in those, but anything that could paint a picture there?
So I don't know that I just don't have the inside knowledge. That would really be a Mary and Janet question. So I'm gonna have to take that one back. Back to you or back to the committee. But that would be interesting to add into this, actually, what we're learning from exit interviews. So I'll put that on directors.
Yeah, we'll revisit it at committee, but I think it's, that's one of the things that we've talked about regularly, is it's important to try to get as much participation into that as possible. And we've talked different strategies and different options in terms of what that might look like. But the more you can have honest, truthful conversations with individuals that are voluntarily exiting the district, the more it can maybe help us from those situations happening again. It can give us information in terms of areas that we might need to focus on.
Yep.
Well, and that's why we talked about like a third party
Yep.
leading the exit interviews too, because
Yep.
that way they don't have that feeling of it coming back at them if they were to ever want to come back too. So I don't know where that's at either.
I think even a percent of people who left, who successfully had an exit interview completed, could be a good measure, because then you're seeing how of the people who are voluntarily leaving are taking the time to fill out that exit interview. Since it's not a requirement, it's a voluntary thing for them to do. It might be a good measure to see how we can try to really get at that turnover rate, like what are the things that are driving people away or pulling people away? And are there other things we can do to try and stop that? But it does come down to, if people are going to be truthful, they don't want to burn bridges.
Well, and
that
that's why
sort
we
of
thought
thing,
if it was a
to be
third
able to
party,
see,
they
but-
would be less intimidated.
But if we stop and say, oh, only a third of the people leaving are actually doing an exit interview.
Right. Mhm.
Okay, well, how can we fix that problem?
Right.
Because maybe the third of the people who are filling it out are in one group, you know, it's,
Right.
it's might skew the data, and then we're trying to fix
Mhm.
a problem that's not a real problem or a real widespread
Yeah.
problem.
Right.
sort of thing.
Mhm.
I'll just say from our practice, I think exit interviews have value as you described, but it's very difficult to get above 30 to 40% participation. And I think to your point, they can sometimes skew based on, because it's a small number of people, you might take a theme from just a couple of people. I really, some of what you're doing with the engagement survey, even thinking about stay interviews, which is more of the, on the front end, we're going through a round of them in our organization. Could be more valuable, but I do appreciate that you're trying. I just didn't want you to feel unsuccessful that you don't have that many people doing it, because it's
No,
not typically.
And I like the idea of stay interviews, but my concern still kind of is very similar to what we've talked about with exit interviews. If you are staying, or if the goal is for you to stay and you have some legitimate concerns, how honest are you going to want to be? Because of the fear that in some way, shape, or form, that's going to come back on you. So my fear with that is still, are we really getting the information that we need? And hopefully there's not a lot of these horrible situations that these people are just afraid to talk about. But it happens. And then people are afraid to talk, and that's, and those are the people that we really want that information from, so.
I do like I just want to say, I do like the idea of state interviews, though. I was just thinking about this, like, there's quite a few like younger teachers were at Madison, but they choose to stay. So there's something, you know, because I know we could, you know, in this market, they could go anywhere. So it would be, I think that's a good thing too, is like, what is it about here that you're, you know, you want to stay? Because I think that's good too, to tap into that, you know, and to figure that out too. So that would be interesting data too, that us to be able to see and look at.
Way more time consuming and a little bit down
Oh.
the road would be, you know, using both pieces of data together. Because if you're doing stay interviews and you have somebody who's really glowing about, you know, what they're doing and where they are and everything else, and then 2 years later, they materially leave, like what happened in that time frame.
Any other questions?
Mr. Burns,
Unless you got them. you can-
I always go last, you know how it is.
Alright. For the employee engagement survey participation, have we? Is there a way to but actually show how that survey has impacted the district? Like, does whatever they're saying, like that, we're actually hearing what they say and acting upon it? Because if you're just doing a survey for the sake of a survey, who cares? But if you're doing a survey and then you see that there's action being taken to promote it, to address the issue, to be like, okay, there's a lot of people that are saying XYZ, let's take some actions to see if we can fill that gap. And because if people see change based on their feedback, they're going to be much more willing to offer that feedback than otherwise, because, you know, it has no impact on them if it does nothing.
Yeah, so there is a whole rollout protocol that happens following each administration of the survey. And it starts with, usually I model it each round. Deidre did last week for leadership because I had a doctor's appointment to get to. But it really focuses on a conversation around the top 3 scores or items and the bottom 3. And the process really asks for specific feedback, and that's some of what those Post-its are over there. On really asking, so the people that took the survey giving me feedback, I'm like, okay, so here are the 3 highest. Tell me what you see me doing that contributes to you rating that a higher score. Because what I want to make sure I understand my behaviors so I don't change those, right? So I don't get rid of those behaviors. I continue those behaviors and maybe even accelerate them or expand them. And then the same is true on the 3 lowest. And usually those, the leader will ask for those on Post-it notes, not verbally, so that it's a little more anonymous and you can give maybe a little more pointed feedback. But that question is, what would you see me doing if you were to rate this a 4, right? So now I'm getting really, okay, so do this instead of what I'm currently doing to try to move the needle on those. And that happens in the fall and in the spring. And so there is a good loop for employees to know that their feedback is acknowledged and we do something with it, and in a pretty short term.
You know, what might be interesting, and I'm just thinking about Dr. Lexman, is I wonder about the opportunity to then speak more broadly to it. So that occurs in every school and every department, and the conversation is slightly different because of what's happening there, but I'm not sure we've ever done here, and I don't see it often, but I have seen kind of once all that has occurred, almost a superintendent message that says, we've all had these conversations. You should have heard the individual actions at your school or department. Here a highlight of a couple things we understand people are doing. Just back to your point that even the rollout conversation might not convince someone that we're going to do something different. I'm just thinking about it as you say that. And I know for another thing is often reminding people later. So we do this practice in our own organization, and sometimes it's a couple months later that you want to say, hey, just a reminder, I'm doing this. It was because we thought it would be helpful. Is it helpful?
Right.
Before you get to another survey, because by then you're in a whole nother window.
Right, and that, I mean, I guess that's kind of what it's like, even just putting out the action steps of what came through, so they want you to do this, so to everybody, here's the action steps that we're gonna look at doing based on the feedback, and, come back 3 months. We're doing these, how are they working for you? Or are like, but just so that people there's that active, proactive approach to engaging with their feedback. And trying to make adjustments as needed. And that's, not just you, but like whoever. So.
Okay.
Right. I don't know if I have a ton more to add, like, to that. My organization does something similarly. We have quarterly engagement surveys. Then what happens is at one of our weekly all company meetings, we talk about those results, and similar, we talk about the 3 that were maybe at the top, 3 at the bottom. But then the areas that we know we need focus on is assigned to somebody at the leadership level. This is my focus for the next quarter. These are the things that I'm going to work on with whatever other stakeholders to make sure we improve on. And then the next quarter, we revisit it and make sure, hey, were those things done? Is there still work to do? Kind of where are we from that perspective? I think I heard a lot of those things to some degree being said, but I think kind of that ownership piece is a good piece as well. And if it's at the school level, then obviously that's a little different, but if it's something that, it's district thing, then okay, who's handling that? Whose responsibility is that to kind of look into that to make sure that we're putting the proper focus into it?
If I can just add something to that one, that's part of the principal's evaluation too.
Okay.
Right, so that's one of the things that the principals are also doing rapid cycle feedback. So they set goals for themselves. Some of them set their goals around math at the middle school level. That may or may not have been some strong encouragement for me to set their goals around that. Some of them set some of their goals around employee engagement. And when we had the leadership rollout the other day, Brian, that's part of what we talked about. Like, this will be something that I'm following up with you then, and your rapid cycle feedback. Brendan, some of what you mentioned, we have some principals who actually put that then on their staff meeting agenda. You guys asked me to work on this. Here is an example of me doing that. Please continue to give me feedback if this isn't right the thing that's really hitting the mark on it. So some of the principals are really good at being very clear and specific on, you asked me to do that and I'm giving you your feedback. Because we want to make sure employees know we should never ask for information that we're not planning to act on. And so it's not a waste of time to take the survey. It's not a waste of time to do some of those things. It gives us some of those bigger markers. There's a couple of the schools that steadily on pace, and occasionally you'll see a weird dip in the data. And then we follow up with that leader to say, hey, what is going on? Occasionally they'll say to us, my scores are going to be down. I'm really putting some pressure on some people because we're struggling with X, Y, and Z that doesn't align to our equity beliefs or doesn't align to the work of our strategic plan. When that's happening, sometimes we see that feedback back in the employee engagement score. And then sometimes it's a bit of a red flag to be able to follow up with a leader who might be struggling. And maybe, especially if that becomes a pattern over time. It's also we have 2 interim principals right now. And it's the first marker that we look at to make sure an interim principal is on track. So sometimes it's the marker we use to then go back and meet with the staff, or it's the marker we use to say, we're ready to adjust this person and perhaps move them into the full-time role. These are very high employee engagement scores, and they're consistent with what we're seeing when we're out and about in the buildings as well. So there are a few points at which each one of those is followed up on at the school level.
Jane?
In the past, when we filled out the employee, the survey, we had a window and we just, you sent it out and you said, hey, make sure that you fill this out. And then we just at our leisure did that. Why don't we make it, at a staff meeting, or why aren't we taking more measures? Because it seems to me, and I don't want to use the word mandatory, but it seems to me that it should just be this is what we do here in our community. We fill out the survey. And I'm very interested, I know that you don't have names, but I'm very interested in, are more elementary filling it out as opposed to high school, or, because elementary teachers are just like, they're
By nature, they're rule followers. Yeah.
Yeah, we are. A staff
Right.
meeting and you say, oh, my gosh, you guys, we're not.
Yeah.
Fill out your survey. I just don't understand why we don't do that.
Some of the schools do, right? And even some of the secondary schools that had a decent rate of participation
Yeah.
provided time in a staff meeting for it and just said like, hey, as a recap, like many of you were mentioning, as a recap, these are the things you asked me to work on.
Right.
These are a few of the ways that I've worked on that. Here's the survey again. This year, the questions took a bit of a shift from previous surveys. And so we had, yep. So
Did we change the survey at all?
We did.
yes,
We did.
Based on our last conversation, I know when we met with you last
Was I
summer.
talking about it?
Yeah.
then?
Yep.
yeah.
Sorry, I don't remember.
Yep.
Yeah.
I
So
was like, we gotta, work
Yes.
on that a little bit, yeah.
So part of what we did at leadership the other day when I did the rollout was actually read all the questions on the new survey, make sure we knew what it was asking, make sure, right, that reminder that, staff, we need to make sure that we're reviewing it because it's important. Because guys, if this isn't the right tool to get the data that we need, right, if this isn't helping us move the needle, then we have to just discover what tool is the right tool to be using. But we shouldn't just keep giving it because that's what we've always done. Right? If we're moving the needle on things and staff give us feedback that we're doing intentional things that are helping that, then the survey is the right tool to get us the right information to move the needle on that. Right? So hopefully that's what you're seeing in all of it, but that was the conversation we had at the meeting the other day. Data is only as good as how many people provide it, right? If they're filling out a survey, and then only as good as what you do with it. So we had a lot of those conversations the other day with the principals, and normally we just do the rollout with the principals, but we did it with all of leadership team because the coaches do contribute quite a bit to how that survey is perceived, what's happening in the schools. And so for them to really understand why it's so important, we felt was really important this last time.
Is it silly just to ask that we shift the name of it from the survey to feedback? Because if that's what we're giving, because sometimes your brain automatically checks out like, oh, survey. But if it's feedback, that might be something that just simple vocab change to like, this is your opportunity to give feedback on what's happening.
That's what the letter says, like when we roll it out, but I agree with you, right? A survey and a feedback opportunity for feedback feel like different things.
Right, so I mean, just changing how we're talking about it even now, the employee feedback.
Right.
Collecting. Stuff out.
Yeah, I think my only concern would be we probably gather feedback from employees in lots of ways. And so I just wouldn't want to lose that this is a particular tool, as Deidre just said, at a particular time. But I think you could certainly flex, how it's titled, but just, I think keeping it as, this is not about all of the we're using all of the feedback, but this is a very particular twice a year kind of dipstick that we do. Yeah. Others?
All right, I had one. And it's regarding the implementation of a compensation system that is and commensurate with our area districts. And the things that we have here are not, they're arbitrary things. They're things we've done. It's a list of things that we've done, but it's not showing any sort of progress any way. So we don't know if these things are actually improving that or are at the same level we were before, or if we're actually worse off. In order to look at that, we'd actually need to look at the average salaries at the districts around us and say, okay, we did these things and now our average salary is this. In comparison to their districts, is that better, worse, or the same? So for me, from a data perspective, I would like to see something that is more black and white, I guess you'd say, as to what you're looking at. So these are things that we have done to try and reach this goal, but based on that, I have no idea if we made any progress at all whatsoever, or if we took a step back, forward, or the same.
So we shared that tool at some meeting from Baird.
I was just gonna say that, yeah.
Is the interactive tool that allows you to, either select or do groups or CISAs or, and so it's all publicly available data that they pull. And it models out how we then compare, and you can separate out salary, you can separate out benefits, you can put them together. And I think if you remember, when we looked at just salary, we were kind of below the average in a group. When we add our benefits, we end up in the middle to the high end of our group, but maybe it's worth revisiting that for the board.
And I would think, Dr. Lexman, that you'd only use a tool like that once a year.
Yes.
Because it's data source is not sensitive enough to gather these items. So I think to your point, Noah, what we're doing here is in the interim between a sort of annual measure where we actually compare, here are some of the things we've tried. But I would think at the end of the year, we'll have to go back to that Baird tool and say, okay, as a result of all that, how do we compare? And we do tend to use an external source because nobody wants to share all that data.
Yeah, we would have to make sure that we especially captured we don't have baseline data on it, because we did share that tool for those on the board who were here when we did the workshop on the compensation committee, right? Remember, it kept going up and it was like, here's how we compare to Oak Creek, here's how we compare to CISA 1, here's how we compare to Southeast Wisconsin, right? And we kept doing the model over and over again. But I would anticipate we could create some baseline data from that to show now that's where we stood then. This is where we stand now. Our goal is to get to this, like where in that comparative chart do we want to be versus getting to a higher average within the area.
Yeah, and that's just the point I'm trying to make. These are all great things. And hopefully that means we did make progress, but I can't tell from just looking at that. And so I think if we have some actual number, figure, or goal, like the other things, we want to move from here to here, from either that's from the bottom third to the middle third or whatever it is and then identifying what are the area districts that we're comparing ourselves to. So that, because there's a lot of talk about that among staff, among the community, and I think that delineating it specifically, and then I think that helps us then delineate the goals that we're trying to what tools are we using to try to achieve that goal? Because there's a lot of different ways, the benefits, the salary. Well, yes, well, what's more important to staff and what all that stuff I think all comes together. But if we're not specifically saying, well, here's the 10 districts that we're comparing ourselves to, and this is what their average are, and right now we're here, and we want to move to here. And these are the things that we're doing to try to get us to here.
Yeah.
That's what I would like to see.
Yeah, and that would make total sense. And it's possible with that tool. Teachers, it's not a publicly, we have access to the tool because we work with Baird.
Sure.
But teachers can also look up that sometimes when a teacher will say to me, I think so-and-so makes so much more, but that's public information. So I frequently encourage the teacher, let's look it up. Like maybe that's accurate, maybe it's not. And lots of times we find, looks like that's not accurate. You actually do make more than your friends somewhere else. And if you add in the benefit, right? So that's been a good tool when you can use a concrete data point to say, actually, when we look at it, this is what it is. And it's not an I gotcha to anybody, but if you have this feeling that you're in this particular bucket and then you learn you're not, people are like, oh, great. And they move right along, right? And then they say, never mind, I think I'm going to stay. Oh, okay. Sounds great, right? When they know the actual facts.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that's good. Helpful.
That's it for me. Oh, look what I did. Mr. Button.
But it's off of yours. And so I guess the other piece with that and having those data points, I think that's good because we have access to it,
Mhm.
but does the public? And so
No.
when they're having that conversation of like, well, teachers are paid too much or they're not paid enough. What we're talking about, well, we need to increase this so we can
Right.
compete. If we don't have a data point there that says, yeah, this is where we are and what we're trying to move to, that I think that would add to the conversation. So people are like, okay, well, maybe they
Yep.
do. So I think giving that clarity here,
Mhm.
especially if this is going out, would be important because no one else has that access to go and manipulate those things and be like, well, I can check this.
Yeah.
You can check individual teachers, but not the district as a whole.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. And even being able to check individual teachers and make it concrete helps people quite a bit. So I'm 100% in agreement. We'll have to check Aaron with Baird if we're allowed to do like a screenshot, kind of where we were versus, because a visual around that, where you sit in the comparison to other people is also frequently very helpful to people. Even when we looked at that in that Baird model, when I saw it for the first time, I was like, oh, this is hugely helpful because it's very visual as to exactly where you sit and comparatively.
And I think the other thing I'm hearing just as we roll into the following school year, because we won't change these annual targets mid-year. But I think what I'm hearing you say, Noah, is next year, it should say something like that ensures our district is on average comparable to A, B, C, and D, or in the
Right.
top 5 in our county,
Right,
whatever you
right.
want to say.
Bottom third to
But
mid third or
something that's
something.
more-
to that
Whatever,
effect.
yes, a measurable thing that we can report back on.
Yeah.
Right.
Because
Great.
within other districts within the year, they might swap
Yep.
around. So even comparing us to Tosa, us to Muskegon, Norway it might change. They might drop out or increase a lot or something like that. And then, so I think by using thirds or percent,
Yeah.
we're in the top 30%,
Yeah.
whatever, that keeps us. So we're comparing apples to apples all the time, regardless of what other districts are passing or what they're doing.
And plus, that is also a helpful marker as you shift post-retirement benefits and things like that, as we've updated insurance, like how did that change?
Right.
Where we sit, so that we know that was a good decision that we keep saying allows us more room to increase salary eventually, right? Those aren't quick fixes, but lots of times eventually those things allow us to increase salaries.
Precisely.
So to measure that over time would make some sense.
Cool. So next steps with this one. We talked a lot about that first bullet, really expanding communication and encouraging staff. We'll talk more about increasing participation in the survey or in the employee feedback, whatever we start to call it. This one from Marianne, I like is continuing to increase communication efforts with professional staff and address issues in a timely manner. So the idea there is be more and more responsive from HR when an employee brings concerns. That's how you build trust. They start to see, I have a concern and there's a response. Increasing awareness of additional benefits. So really communicating our benefits effectively. Internally, everybody knows the story of a brother that's made a small fortune communicating benefits to big companies. He runs his business out of his house in San Diego. And he's a benefits communication specialist. That's what he does. And he gets hired by big companies to just tell the story of the benefits you get. And he'll get on government sites, and he has a few government clients, and he'll call me like, there's nowhere on your website that talks about your benefits, but I found some mistakes on your website. He does that too. But we don't do a good job telling the story of the benefits, and government entities usually have better benefits than private sector. So that's one of the next steps. Then continuing to evaluate the compensation. I think we just talked about maybe there's some metrics around it that really tell us, are we on track, off track with what we're trying to do? And then continuing to really recruit through professional organizations that, are either intentionally focused around or organized around people of color. The superintendent search, you did that through Ray and Associates, right? So I think similar efforts in recruiting teachers, recruiting principals to go to the organizations where we're likely to get the attention of people of color is one of the next steps.
All right. Well, tell Mary Ann you did a fantastic
Okay.
job. And I switched my seat because Amanda has some great show and tell. So here we are.
Right.
Yeah.
So I get a lot out of hearing all of your questions and ideas from all of the other areas too, because It all usually touches communications and how we can tell our story in some way. So thank you for all of that. So our 2025 goals, the first two are around the parent satisfaction survey. So both increasing participation and increasing the mean on that survey. Increasing our social media engagement, maintaining an above industry open rate for our Constant Contact, which is the platform that we host our district newsletter on. So the industry average for education is 30%, so remaining above that open rate. And then decreasing the number of resident students who open enroll out to other districts. So those are the big strategic plan goals that we're tracking. So for 2022, 2023 targets, those first two, again, our parent satisfaction survey is this spring. So I don't have anything to report on that quite yet. Our social media engagement currently sits at 38,298. So we are now hosting how we track this all on one platform, which is very helpful. So that tracks Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And engagement, as a reminder, is likes, shares, and comments. So we are seeing that continue to increase. And then our open rate of our district newsletter remains high, around 54%, which is awesome. And our list of emails that goes to continues to grow. So we're growing that while still growing it with an engaged audience that is also opening it. So that is also good. And then the open enrollment application period opens in February. So we don't have anything to report on that at this time.
Questions? I have a comment. I think you do a wonderful job.
Thank you.
I know I said something when we were at Irving to the Spectrum One guy that was there, but you're at things, there's videos that it's just a lot of communication and really good communication about the really unique and wonderful things that happen in our district. Things that since I've been on the board has always been like, we need to do this more. We have to communicate these things better. And there's always room for improvement, obviously, but I just think since you've been in your position that it's just been night and day as far as how that communication is. The social media obviously is like 500% more than what we used to be able to do. And I think that's a lot of what people are seeing are coming from those sorts of things. And I think it helps with staff as well, because they're seeing the things they're doing in their classrooms being promoted by the district in a positive way. And that encourages them to, because it's extra effort and things like that they have to go through. And maybe only the kids in their class are really getting that aspect of it. By seeing it promoted that way, I think it's such a great benefit and helps them feel, I think I would feel more satisfaction in my work environment if I was getting promoted in those sorts of ways. So I just want to thank you for those efforts for you and your team in doing that, because as someone who's been before and after it is really, a fantastic change. So, and then I have one suggestion. Going to the movies, I see at Marcus these promotions for schools, charter schools that are in Brookfield or in these things. And so I was wondering, like, it probably costs an arm and a leg, but would it be a useful thing to see how much it would cost and maybe run it for a certain period of time and see if that has any impact on our enrollment or anything like that, That's just only that one thing I've kind of thought about, and it's like, I don't know how much that would cost, but a lot of people go see, runs before every single movie that they play. So you could get to a lot of people, maybe not people in the district, but just letting them know about their project-based learning and, we have tons of videos maybe we could even just use already without having to prove something new, but something that I always thought would be a different, maybe our audience that we could get.
Yeah, awesome. To expand on that, the media relations piece a little bit, Noah and I talked about briefly when we were at an event together, but that is like a slow and steady. I'm really building those relationships with some reporters that come to like 1 in 20 invites that I extend. And like Deidre touched on, they are all about it when we have a power outage. They want to be my best friend, but those relationships are, I would say we have more go-tos that are kind of starting to catch on, that there's really impactful stories that we can tell that aren't just like the crisis stories. So that has been exciting to see slowly take hold a little bit.
Yeah. So what's next?
Questions?
All right, so we discussed in our November committee meeting strategies around the parent survey. Last year, we didn't necessarily do anything intentional around that messaging wise. It was just like, here's the survey, take it. So we did brainstorm as a committee ways to make sure that there's extra iPads at schools if principals want to engage like during pickup or drop off, doing some incentives for schools. So that opens in April, and those are kind of some strategies that are in the works around that. We have been doing some neat community partnerships on social media, which helps when we were talking about getting more community members in our schools for POLs. One thing that I'm seeing as a way social media can intersect with the in-person, getting our parents and our community in our schools is some of these online partnerships. So for example, we're doing some cool work with the senior center this spring in some video shoots, and they were looking for small businesses to come and present about their business to the senior center. But we actually have one of our student-led businesses, Dylan's Coffee Shop, coming to present about his process, not just hand out coffee, but talk about how he started this business and what he learns. And that in-person experience actually came from us partnering with them on like a social media giveaway. So kind of like bridging the gap with some of our community agencies and help hopefully get more community members in our schools. Sometimes we have to go to them first and then maybe they'll come to us. And then continuing to grow our newsletter audience while keeping our open rate high. We already touched on that. And then Erin and I have been discussing a open enrollment survey. So in May 2018, so before me, there was a survey done trying to understand why families do choose to open enroll out. So Erin and I have a meeting scheduled. We've briefly talked about revisiting that survey, making sure we understand what was learned from that survey. The way Erin and I understand it is it was very quantitative and not very qualitative in terms of like the stories of these families. And then once the data was collected, we feel like there's an opportunity to do something with it and like reach back out to those families. And so we're hoping to take that survey a step further this year and be more intentional on how we engage with the families that leave us and hopefully understand why. Great. So next we have a Qualtrics dashboard update. So this dashboard is in the more manual phase of how it's pulling data. So everything that you'll see here has been manually entered. The systems on the back end aren't yet set up to pull automatically so that these widgets update without having us to go in and automatically pull them. But this is a preview of what this will look like. And I believe Dr. Lexman has shared with you an example dashboard of kind of like a big picture vision of this. And I've gotten a lot of great ideas from earlier this evening on what other widgets we can add to this and what we want to track. So continue to share those. This is called the at a glance page. So this will be some of our district-wide data and whatever we want to display here. This enrollment by building widget is not pulling correctly right now. I'm not sure why. It's been in a battle with this scholarships dashboard. I'll scroll back up, but when the scholarships widget is working, the enrollment by building is not. So that's being worked on the back end, but all of these are static. So there's nothing being fed into them. This main page. And then over here on the left-hand side, we'll be able to pull some of the numbers that we reported on tonight by area into, you know, we can deep dive more into the employee engagement survey or into some of our communications data. There is also a school information page. So this links all of our schools. This links to Google Maps for each school, and then their principal welcome videos all link here as well. So the possibilities are endless. What's in progress right now is attendance data. We're really close with the technology team on getting that to pull automatically each week so that we can see by building what attendance is looking like. And once we have this district at a glance page where we want it, we've discussed going live with that page and then continuing to work on building out these 4 areas on the left-hand side. And when we do go live with this, we can select out what we want to be entirely public facing and which metrics would be helpful for the board. So all of that is really customizable as well.
Well, and it involves so many decisions, right? So every one of these graphs is multiple decisions on the back end. And then, as we talked about this evening, what needs explanation versus what can just sort of sit.
Mhm.
And to your point, Amanda, I think the question about what's helpful to the public versus what's meaningful to internal staff members. So this is a dramatic and intense undertaking, but think about how much simpler this report out tonight would be. Right? We don't have to construct these other places where we're manually pulling data. We can lift that up and then talk more about what are we doing and not just what's the data source. So that's exciting. Sorry.
And I appreciate it. And I think we can get really creative in ways that we can help the community to understand the why behind some of these numbers in ways that there's some features where you can hover over different widgets and have text expand.
So it could explain.
One of these like lists the languages. Yeah, so we can be as detailed and as helpful and as creative as we want in helping tell the story behind the numbers instead of just presenting numbers that maybe the public doesn't have anything to ground or situate them in.
Does Qualtrics use, you know, what the back, like, what is it using? Is it Tableau or is it Soft BI or
It's not Tableau,
Oh.
but I'm not quite sure what it is.
Power BI?
Yeah.
It might be, what's that word when you own it yourself?
Proprietary.
Thank you.
It probably.
I mean, they've been around so long.
They have?
I think,
Okay.
yeah, they're pretty common across educational institutions.
Are they? Okay.
This is the Oklahoma one. We'll see if it will load. That I believe you've all seen that can give us a really good idea too of like all the different directions that this can go.
Quick question on that hovering feature, like just looking at that ACT score, like if I was to click on that, on the 21-22 average, would it take me to expanded reporting? Like this is how many kids took it, here's the range, here's the high end, the low end.
That is a great question. We could definitely build that in. And that's a good example of like situating the data somewhere and helping it to like make more sense.
Mhm.
Yes, definitely.
I was actually filling out some ideas just on formatting, like what you could pull, because we hear from time to time that our students who stay continuously are performing better.
Hmm.
And something like that where you can include all the students or just the continuous or just the new students, all those different things and run it side by side and really get an understanding of what that data means as opposed to just saying you're failing. Well, it's a really simplistic way of looking at it. So I was just trying to think of ways to look at that data.
Any other questions for Amanda, or do you have questions for them?
No.
I think in the end, what we're really aiming for is that the dashboard highlights, it may have lots more information available, but it highlights the same measures you're trying to improve. So the communication is really clear. So exciting. All right.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you. Welcome.
Evening, everyone. So last but not least, I suppose. One, right? Sure, all the questions you might have, I've answered over the last 7 meetings, but there's more, I'm sure, to answer them. I guess we'll just jump in. So our goals for this strategic plan for the Fiscal Stability and Efficiency Committee are really around the things we've been talking about for the past few months. So the number one is reducing our audit findings from 12 to 3. And so double-digit audit findings, I'm sure, as each of you are aware, is a red flag really for school districts. And it's really tied to really operational processes and practices. And so when you get an audit finding, it's both an opportunity to review kind of where you've been and kind of why the errors happen. So it's not abnormal for most districts to have some audit findings, but double digits are certainly a red flag. So one of them is going to be consistent every year. It's because we don't prepare our own financial statements. So auditors do that. And so we'll have one every year. And really from there, audit findings come from relationships and also due to errors. So we changed auditors when we had the financial crisis. And so we've been working with Baker Tilly for a number of years. And so kind of what I always say is audit findings either are sometimes there's really big issues and they lead to really changing systems. And other times auditors give recommendations that really come through recommendations through relationships. So, hey, this is a little bit of an issue. Maybe you want to look at this, and then that becomes a recommendation, right? And so but we've had a lot of success here. Happy to report in the next slide that our audit findings this year went down to 3 from 4. So that's a good progress to make. The next bullet here is on our fund balance. So increasing or sustaining really our fund balance to be 20% of our operational general fund. And so we've met that target for a number of years now. And at this point, my recommendation would be to sustain that, because we've talked about when you increase the fund balance in a higher poverty district, you have adverse effects on aid, and so therefore higher impacts in the community. So finding creative ways like this board has done in previous years to shift surplus budgets into trusts, which would be either a 46 or, that's really our trust at this point, but in future years, maybe a 73 should be decided to open that given the OPEB discussions we've had. Shifting surpluses count as shared cost expenses and therefore have no inverse impact of aid. So at this point, that bullet we've been making progress on, but improving the credit rating, we've talked about that. Developing and implementing the facilities master plan, which we have had and been working through that. And then ensuring that no more than 2% of our total budget is not being unspent each year. So budgeting accurately within that 2%. So jumping ahead here to I kind of preface this a bit in the earlier slide, but audit findings, we got our audit reports a few weeks ago. So that'll be shared at committee this Thursday and talked about thoroughly. And then typically talked about in January, but given some of the, we have a lot of things going on with the board recently. So that'll be occurring here late February, early March with the auditors. They'll be coming to discuss those. That's really good news. Our fund balance, I kind of noted here, we increased our fund balance last June by $3 million in the board. At that time, earmarked the funds for the OPEB discussion we've had. So at this point, we're well past 20%. Our fund balance as of June was 37 million, and with a total revenue budget of about 117, you're well past 20% and the 30%. And so that's a very healthy fund balance. Credit rating. So you only typical to similar to your own personal finances, right? Similar to ours, your credit rating is one of the things, especially for an organization this size, you only really get evaluated when you take on new liabilities. So if the board were ever wanting to go to get a bond, that's when an evaluation would be done for your credit rating to be evaluated and then published, right? So I haven't really done that only because we haven't really been seeking that. So, but if you can go back to when our credit rating went to a high grade bond to AA2, which is very, a very high to Moody's and S&P, are the things they look at are going to be, your budgeting, they look at your fund balance, look at your expenses, and they look at things like that. So all of those things have improved. So I have no doubt that should we want to do that and spend the money to do that, it would be increased, but there hasn't been a reason to do that yet. So that's that. The facilities master plan, that's been completed, but at this point, I kind of put a hold there on that because it will need to be updated again with the vacant or the buildings we've decided to close. So then shifting those dollars and CIP to different, taking the funds that it would have taken to bring a building up to what we believe is to code or, the CIP needs in the building, shifting those dollars to other priorities of the board is really the next step with that. And so I think getting into the details as we get into those decisions getting made and creating an updated plan is really the next step there. But at this point, this goal's been met, but really, I don't think it's really met. It's not done yet. So that's kind of where I left it there. And then accurately budgeting. So we generally hold the end of January review of the current budget. And so the reason it gets challenging, it would seem to be simple to just run a report and go, where are you at with the budget? And I can generally do that. And so I know that we're at this point, we are generally we have incurred less expense than we planned, which is meaning that we're projecting a surplus at this point. To get very detailed, usually I wait until the end of January, until January is reconciled to get a really good sense, because it's challenging to do in a couple different ways. A good example is health insurance. We pay for the month of health insurance for all employees. And then in their paychecks, the 10% that they pay comes out, right? So we recoup the revenue. Same thing with our retirees through Benestar and through Anthem and through dental. And so you prepay a month and a half or 2 months in advance, and you receive the funds in retroactive ways. So the 6-month review is a good picture because you prepay December and January, and then as those funds are reconciled, they have to reconcile by the end of January for them to be continuing insurance. So the end of January picture is a very clear picture of kind of where things are at. And there's things that change, open enrollment out, that's on a day count. So if a student is open enrolled out and they return to the district, we don't pay for the whole year, you pay per day. So getting a clear picture of where that's at with the second Friday count, to me, is a very good picture. But at this point where I have it today is we're about 3.5% surplus at this point. But it's to be determined really where that's going to actually fall. And so, that's kind of where things are at. Any questions on this?
So I think last year when we did this evaluation on the budget and we realized that there was going to be more than the 2%, and we kind of had some other places where we could spend those funds to ensure that we could reach that goal. I presume the plan would be the same if we get to the end of January, we are at 3.5% or whatever it turns out to be above 2%, that we would look at that and say, okay, where are places that we could take some of this extra money or money that we haven't spent because the expenses were lower than we were expecting to still benefit this school year.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, those are discussions that I think we're starting to have internally, in terms of, I'm sure each of you have seen that the CPI came out for the year at 8.1%. So that's a discussion we've had internally, at the director level around like, what are we doing? What are other districts doing? How are we going to continue to move the needle? I guess looking back at your conversation earlier with the employee engagement and salary and things like that, and facilities, and we have the discussion around the OPEB trust. So the $7 million that the board has committed to that, if we have a surplus, are we going to look at uncommitting those dollars? There's I think a bigger discussion there, but I think certainly that once we get a really good picture of that's going to happen, those are things that we could do. So absolutely. Yeah. I think if once that's decided, I think, potentially even a workshop through committee and then here might be something we look at doing. So, but that's typically the process we've done with the budget amendment process at the end of the year. Hopefully the better approach to me would be to try to do that earlier. Sure. Into April, if possible to get a good picture of that. So
what's next?
So next steps, I kind of listed a few of the projects that we've been working on here. Because to me, the goals we have are great. And I think a lot of them are going to be sustained to being met through our processes that we have through school services up to the finance department, to the board committee, and to the full board in terms of aligning our staffing with enrollment and the board's commitment to maintaining a balanced budget. And so these goals, a lot of them will continue to be met. So to me, it's really focusing short and long term around keeping the fiscal health of the organization, but also then taking the priorities of the board and the administration and trying to implement them to have larger impact long term. We're doing that with school consolidation, doing that with the OPEB discussion. I met with the director team last week, Wednesday, around like, hey, taking advantage of the Fed's increasing rates. That's not really great for the world, but that might be great for us with a huge cash position, right? And so working with BMO to having the nightly shift of dollars from our checking account into our money market, or money market today now is producing a 2.5% ratio. So you might think, oh, that's not very high. With $30 million in the bank, that's about $70,000 a month, right? And then if we can shift, so doing so I worked on a cash flow analysis, and but what's our low cash point? So our low cash point throughout the year last year is about 18 million, right? So could we move part of those dollars into a CD, and a CD is producing 5%? Now you're looking at a full year investment with no risk at $1 million to the board profit. So like short term, doing some creative things to free up dollars for future budgets, not just long term, but like next year, right? So to me, that's where the real work here should begin, among these other projects around that will also save dollars. District office relocation, you're going to spend money to recruit money, right? We talked about that. School consolidation, that continues to be a focus of ours throughout the year. The OPEB restructuring, debt defeasance is something I've briefed with committee that will come later in the year in March to save dollars by being able to pay off our 38 debt, not energy efficiency, kind of splitting that out a bit, but that'll be a workshop later in the year. And then, you know, the short term really lends itself to long term around, you know, having some larger expenses that we have planned for can have an impact on long-term planning around when does energy efficiency fall off? When does the Fund 80 project with the rec fall off? What does that look like for what we plan to do long-term? And so that to me is where we're at in terms of finance and operations. And so that's really what I intend to keep working. I think it's the best. I think that really puts us in the best position for our staff, but also for the district. So
I just want to juxtapose this versus the first board meeting that I participated in, where we got to have a roundtable where we got to figure out, put post-its on what things we needed to cut so that we could still operate compared to we are today.
a number of you have come full circle with
Yes.
that.
This is a much more fun conversation to have because of the options that the hard work that many individuals have participated in over the last 6 years to get to this point has done to put our district in this position. And so I can't stress how there's been a lot of sacrifice and a lot of, you know, down times in that time frame, but we're here now and we're at a point where, you know, really we can just keep on continuing paying off more debt, reducing expenses more, being able to put more money of our budget back into educating kids each and every year, and, you know, keeping the staff compensated at a level that is going to keep them here. Those are the things that, you know, were the goals for me and for a lot of the other people on this board right now that we're doing, and we're able to achieve them. So I thank you for your work and your forward thinking, you know, being able to put money in CDs and get $1 million. Hey, $1 million. Hey, that's, you know, we can put that in Fund 46 and not have to worry about next time we have to redo the fields or something like that. You know, that's stuff that that's not chump change. And we can only do that because of the hard work that was done, put that much money in the bank to be able to do things and be able to pay OPEB and get those two systems working at the same time is a big expense up front, but we'll save money in the district long after any of us here are on the board. So I think that those are all really important things. And, you know, seeing that we're basically achieving all of our financial goals, at this point, I don't know how anyone could say that we are not financially responsible in this district because of everything that we've done to get to this point. So,
yeah, and not facing a fiscal cliff. And that seems to be, you can Google it, Wisconsin fiscal cliff, and you'll have number of articles that are very recent around conversations that, I mean, tough conversations that this board is not privy to having, but not this year having to have, which is a benefit and a luxury. So
exactly.
But yeah.
Any questions, comments? Mr. Burns?
Can we put the slide that shows all of our good work as like the background for our website? Just so-
Everything
We don't-
green, just let-
just For everybody that's saying that we're fiscally irresponsible, let's see, you put $3 million in there, so like.
$37 million. $37 million. It's almost a $40 million swing from 6 years ago. It's just ridiculous.
I think one of the things too that I've kind of taken away and learned through the process of the OPEB project is through meeting with the association and talking with staff now, is I think there's an opportunity to, I think as Marty alluded to, around educating around benefits, like educating our staff, right, around like where we're at financially and like the commitment that we all have, right? That what's our foundation, what are our priorities, and teacher compensation, facility, there's things like that getting in front of them. So I look forward to the opportunity on the 13th and working with Deidre to carve out that time where staff can hear those things during their planned workday. I think that's really important. And I've gotten a lot of good feedback around that from the association. I think that's another opportunity to branch out and tell the story, which seems to be kind of a theme tonight I'm hearing. So, you know,
Tell the story.
so, yeah.
You stole my thunder.
Did I
That
end
was
it?
my clothes.
Okay, well. Well, anyway, thank you.
Yeah.
Good
Thank
job.
you.
Thank you.
So, as Aaron just said, so we've arrived at, the monitoring, progress and the adjustments. I think you've heard some really positive things, that are occurring. And I just, am grateful to the directors for trying to simplify what's very complex. And then I really appreciate all of you highlighting how best to communicate about this, because you're out in the community and you hear the criticisms as well as the celebrations. And I think that's really valuable. And I will just say, I think we have done this many times with different boards here in West Dallas, and that this is an exact example of how it should go, which is there's information reported, you ask great questions, you have us consider things for the future. So it's funny how we set the goals in the summer and we think, oh, they're so perfectly written. And then by about now you start to realize, oh, I think I'd want to make some improvements. And so thank you for that. And just thank you for your diligence in the listening and comparing it to what you're seeing and hearing out in the community. Because I think that's a really valuable lens for your leadership team to have. So that concludes my conversation, unless there are questions.
Questions? Well, thank you for being here and facilitating this discussion. It's very important. I think that unfortunately, I didn't see anyone in the Zoom meeting, but it would have been very informative for anyone who wanted to learn about it. Luckily, these are recorded, so anyone can go back and view them at another time. So thank you again for coming, and we'll look forward to seeing you again, I guess, sometime this summer.
I would hope so.
Are there any questions or comments from the board? If not, I guess I'd look for a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.